Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing a wrap-up of my June monthly priority, which was Pride Month and sort of an extended Queer Lit Readathon. If you're not familiar with my monthly priorities, I will link some videos about that below, but basically I focused in June on reading as many queer books as I could, and I tried to also reach some of the bingo tiles that were part of the Queer Lit Readathon. I will link information about the Queer Lit Readathon below. That is hosted by Tridhardt and Rogan Shannon and was guest hosted this time by the Tea Hags. So in this wrap-up, I'm going to talk about the books that I finished in June that were queer, as well as talk about some of the themes that I saw run throughout these different books and recommend some of my favorites for you. First, let me tell you about the books that I finished in June. So out of the 7 books on my TBR, I only managed to get to 3 of them, but I did read 6 other books that were queer in June. So overall, 9 books total is not too shabby. Let me start with the books that were on my TBR. The first book that I finished was Shout Out, edited by Andrew Wheeler. This is a collection of short comics by various different authors, and it is a YA queer kind of speculative fiction collection. So there's a lot of fantasy and sci-fi and superhero comics in this. I loved the way that this centered so many different queer experiences and was really uplifting in a lot of ways. Not every comic in the collection worked for me, but a lot of them were really, really sweet. This satisfied the bingo prompts of graphic novel, queer friends, and then my own personal choice, which was queer SFF. Next, I finished The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics by Olivia Waite. This is a historical female-female romance set in either Regency or Victorian England, and it follows 2 women, one whose father was an astronomer, and she is also an astronomer and has been doing work but hasn't been getting recognition for it under her own name. And when her father passes away, she needs to find a way to continue doing the astronomy work, so she tries to get another person, a woman who is a countess, to become her patron to allow her to translate a great work of astronomy from French into English, and they fall in love. I really loved this story. It was so sweet, and I really especially liked how, in addition to the relationship between the 2 women, there was also a big emphasis on some of the social issues and the way that their work as women was not valued in the same way that men's work was. So I really liked those aspects of the book. This satisfied the prompt of rainbow cover because this was very red. And the last book that I read that was on my TBR was Bloom by Kevin Panetta, illustrated by Savannah Ganucheau. This is a story that takes place over a summer after the main character, Ari, has graduated from high school, and he's trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life. He wants to move to the big city with friends to start a band, but his parents need him to help out with their bakery. And so he hires Hector to kind of take over for him. And Hector is an excellent baker. So they, throughout the summer, sort of form a relationship very slowly. I did think, though, that that relationship wasn't always healthy. Ari is somebody who goes through a growth arc over the story, but a lot of the story is him kind of being very selfish and very inconsiderate and sometimes cruel to other people. So there was some aspects of this that were really sweet. The artwork was amazing, but I did find that relationship to be maybe not so much my style. In any case, it did satisfy quite a few prompts. It satisfied the summer vibes prompt, the non-coming out prompt, the graphic novel prompt, and the host rec prompt. Now moving on to the books that I read in June that were not on my TBR but still had queer characters or queer themes. So first is Network Effect by Martha Wells. This is the 5th book in the Murderbot Diaries novella series and now novel. I do have a whole series review, so if you're interested in that, you can check it out below. I will link it in the description. This is such a fun book, just like all of the other books in this series. It follows Murderbot, who is a security unit that is basically something like an AI that has some organic parts. And it is someone who has hacked its governor module, so it is no longer controlled by the corporate entity that had created it, and it is going on lots of different adventures, helping out the humans that it meets and also interacting with some of the other AIs. This series is so much fun, and this book was such a great installment. I absolutely loved it. It was so sweet, so much fun, so much action, so much adventure. Definitely recommend the whole series. So this satisfied the prompts of Queer SFF, which was mine, Queer Friends, Non-Coming Out, and 5-star prediction because I knew I was gonna love it. Next is Bingo Love by T. Franklin, illustrated by Jen St. Ong and colored by Joy San. This is a love story that takes place from maybe the 60s up until kind of even into the future. And it follows two women who fall in love as kids, but they are separated because their families don't want them to be together. And then they reconnect as older women at a bingo hall. So I loved the colors in this. I loved the drawing style. It was really beautiful. The themes were really interesting, although it is very drama filled. This has a lot of drama because these women are separated unwillingly by their families, and when they grow up, they end up marrying men. And then when they come back together, there's a lot of pushback against them being together by their families. I did think, though, that it is probably a really impactful story for a lot of people who are forced into lives that they didn't want to live. So it was a reasonable book, if not my favorite. It satisfied the female protagonist over 40 prompt, the graphic novel prompt, and the host rec prompt. Next, I read Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is Acevedo's newest book. It is in verse, so if you've read The Poet X, it's got a very similar feel to that in the way that it is a story about a teenager in verse. This story follows two teenage girls, one in the Dominican Republic and one in New York, who discover after a plane crash kills their father that they are half sisters and that their father was leading a double life, and they have to deal with the grief over losing this person who was so important to them, while also the anger over discovering that he led this double life, and figure out how to connect with each other as sisters. I really, really loved this story. It was absolutely beautiful. And one of the girls, Yahaira, is gay, and she has a girlfriend who is very supportive and just a really good relationship throughout this story. So I very much enjoyed this. I did an entire review of it, so I will link that below if you're interested. It satisfied the prompts of non-coming out and poetry. Next, I read The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is a very large, chunky, 850 page or so standalone fantasy novel. It has amazing world building, lots of different characters, but two of the characters that we follow are a queen and somebody who is kind of a handmaiden, but also a little bit of a warrior. And they fall in love, although it's not necessarily okay in the society because the queen really needs to marry a man and give an heir to the country. So this book is very complicated. There's lots of different characters, lots of different countries. There are dragons, there is war, there's so much going on. But there's definitely some queer romances that are very much a part and a driving factor in the story. So I thought this was a pretty good fantasy if you're up to a long one. It satisfied the Queer SFF prompt. Next, I read Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is another one that I did a standalone review for, so if you're interested, you can check that out below. And I absolutely loved this story. It is a contemporary romance following Danny, who is absolutely so smart, so sharp. She is a PhD student, she's bisexual, and she ends up getting involved in a fake relationship with Zafir, the very handsome ex-rugby player security guard in her building, after he rescues her from a fire drill, and this gets caught on camera and people kind of get behind this, and he needs a little bit of press for the nonprofit that he runs, and Danny really wants a sex friend. So they end up getting involved. This book is so funny, it is so hilarious, and Danny is just such a great character, as is Zafir. I had such a fun time with this book. Do check out my review if you want to know more. And it satisfied a lot of prompts. Satisfied the sports theme, because Zafir is an ex-rugby player and he coaches rugby. Non-coming out, rainbow cover, it is very yellow, and bisexual or pansexual main character, Danny is bi, as well as a 5-star prediction because I read the previous book in this series, Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and loved that so much. So I was highly anticipating this one too. And lastly, I read Not That Bad, edited by Roxane Gay. This is a collection of nonfiction essays about rape culture. Roxane Gay, as well as many of the other contributors in this, are queer, and so I included it, although not every essay is by a queer author. These essays are intense. There is a lot of discussion of sexual abuse and rape and things like that, so be aware that those contents are there. But it had such an important message, I think, about the way that we have a system set up, a society set up, that allows sort of the devaluing of people's bodies and the abuse of those bodies as part of kind of a power dynamic. And I got so much out of this book. I actually buddy read this with Cynthia at Book Whimsy. I'll link her below. And we did an entire discussion video about this book. So if you're interested, I will link that as well. This covered the prompts of nonfiction as well as disabled main character. It's not really main character, it's just that a lot of the people in these essays are dealing with trauma. And so it's that exploration of how to cope with trauma. Okay, so now I want to talk about some of the themes that I noticed across all of these different books. The first theme that I noticed was just the normalization of queerness, of stories that are about characters who happen to be queer, but that's not the point of the story. The point is all of these other things going on. I really loved seeing all of these stories that just centered queer characters but were about something else. So in Shout Out, this was very, very prevalent because all of these stories were very fantastical or superhero related or sci-fi related, and there just happened to be a queer character. Some of the stories did kind of focus on that queer journey, but so much of it was just about giving space for queer characters. In Network Effect, everybody in the world is queer. The whole universe that has been created is filled with queerness as normalcy. So we have so many characters who are non-binary or who are in relationships that are polyamorous or in queer relationships, and it's just such a normal part of the world. And Murderbot itself is agendered, and it's just such a normal part of the world, and that's not the point. It just is, and I really liked that. In Clap When You Land, there is definitely a queer relationship, but that isn't really the point. That isn't the focus of the story. It's just something that happens to be true about one of the main characters, and her girlfriend is her support system. And I really loved that this wasn't a coming out story. It wasn't about other people being upset that she's queer. It's about her relationship with her sister and about them processing their joint grief over their, the loss of their father. That's the story. She just happens to be queer, and I really liked that. Also in Take a Hint, Danny Brown, this is a love story, and it is a love story between a man and a woman, and that woman is bi, and it's great to see just a character who's so comfortable with being bi. There's nothing about it that's coming out. She just is. And it's also great to see a story that is about a bisexual character who has had a relationship with many different women in the past, but the current one is with a guy, and it's just totally normal for her, and I just love that normalcy. Another thing that I noticed throughout a lot of these books was that of prioritizing yourself. So many of these stories really were about people learning to prioritize their own needs and who they are. In The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics, so much of the story is about the two women learning to value themselves, learning to say, this is what I'm good at and this is what I need, and to just really own that. In Bingo Love, we have two women who were separated because their families said they couldn't be together, who find each other again. Their families still say they can't be together, and they say, no, you know what? I'm going to prioritize myself. I'm going to do what I need to do and be with the person that I love. Also in Not That Bad, so much of the content, so many of the essays are really about people learning to say, I'm not going to fall into the tropes, into the stereotypes of what society says people should be. I'm going to stand up for me, for what I need. I'm going to get the therapy that I need, or I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to forgive my abuser, these sorts of things. And it's all about saying, I'm going to prioritize myself. So I saw that in so many of these stories. And the last theme that I really noticed was that of the importance of having the support of your family and friends. There were so many of these stories that talked about this. I think in Shout Out, there's a lot of different friend groups and a lot of kind of people who support each other on these adventures that they go on. So I definitely saw that there. I think network effect, you definitely see this. So many of the adventures that Murderbot goes on, it is either trying to support its friends or its friends are supporting it. And I really loved that kind of emphasis on how we're stronger together. Definitely, I saw this in Clap When You Land as well. This is so much about the two sisters kind of learning to be there and support each other, as well as kind of the aunts and the mom and things like that, being there and supporting each other through difficult times. So those were the themes that I noticed this year. I did spend last year in June also focusing on Pride Month. I'll link that video below if you're interested, but I did want to mention what themes I noticed last year just as a contrast. So last year I had noticed the theme of reconciling your culture and identity, especially when your culture is something religious or some sort of background where people don't accept your queerness. I saw that a lot. I also saw a lot of fear and pain of rejection. So there were a lot of more coming out type stories that I read last year. And then lastly, I saw the theme of really seeing yourself represented. And I saw this a little bit more in the booktubers that I saw talking about the books that I had read, rather than just within the books themselves, but the importance of representation. Okay, so the last thing that I want to do in this video is just recommend some of my favorite books that I read this month. So if you don't have time to read all 9 of the books that I mentioned, these are the 3 that I think you should make time for. So first is Network Effect by Martha Wells, or really the whole Murderbot Diaries series. So if you haven't read anything, I'd suggest start at the beginning. This is just such a fun series, and it's so filled with friendship and family and adventure and growth and emotional growth, and it's so hilarious. So I absolutely loved this. It's a real pick-me-up, and I think that this world where queerness is just so normalized is such a great thing to read. Next, I'd like to recommend Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is so sweet and just really addresses a lot of interesting topics and a lot of kind of processing of grief that I thought was very moving. And again, I loved having a story that has a queer main character where her relationship with her girlfriend is something that's all about support and love, and that isn't the source of the conflict in the story. It's just a beautiful part of it. And lastly, I'd like to recommend Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert, because this was just lovely. It was so much fun. It is hilarious, and it's so filled with emotional growth and connection and a sweet relationship. I really loved the way that the characters learn to support each other. And again, I just love this idea of a main character who is bisexual, and that's just totally normal and accepted. It's never an issue. So for all 3 of these, I think that the theme that I really cared about was this idea of centering queer characters, but a story that isn't necessarily about their queerness. It's just who they are, and giving them that opportunity to shine as wonderful characters who are fully fleshed out and get to do so many interesting things in their lives. Okay, so that wraps up my Queer Pride Month. If you have read any of these books, or you have any thoughts, anything you'd like to share, or any recommendations for me, I'd love to hear from you. So go ahead and leave a comment down below.